You know what really gets under my skin? You know what really drives me crazy? Books! Welcome to Novels We Hate with Behind the Curve. At this point, we should have a theme song here. Okay, now we're into the episode. So, Matt, what inspired this idea for a podcast?
Actually, I was kind of thinking about like how as college students we have limited time.
Yes, we do.
So, I guess I was thinking like, man, like back homeschooling, because it's a background, right? I was homeschooling. So were you, actually, if you don't mind.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, we used to have a lot of time, but we used to really waste my time over books, fantasy novels, just like you in this case. Back after post 2011, when I discovered the films that were Lord of the Rings, I wanted to get that same high somewhere else from a different author. And, as I go on I picked up a lot of books that were a real waste of time, really, for me.
Well, I think that kind of leads us in. Is you were kind of opening us with a story. So, what do you want to? What is your experience with books you hate? What books do you hate and why?
Okay, so I'm not going to have as much as a list, or maybe as in depth as you, as being an English major, having to read or whatever. But have you heard of the Wheel of Time series?
I know of it. I know of it by reputation. I know of it by sight. I mostly know of it because Blind Guardian has an epic song about Wheel of Time.
Oh, really?
Yes.
But that's about it?
That's about it.
Okay, yeah.
Except that you were totally obsessed with it for a few years.
I was, and I don't know if I would say I hate it, but I just got a lot to say about it. So here it goes. No, excuse me. Yeah, the Wheel of Time. So this book is about 23 years actually going, 1990 to 2013. The author actually died in the middle of it, 2007.
Well, that's one way to screw up a timeline.
Yeah, I had a Mormon missionary understudy who filled in the next 5 years, actually. 6 years, Brian Sanderson, I believe his name was.
Brian Sanderson, who actually has a very good reputation among fantasy authors for being a good author.
Does. What do you know about him? Like, I know he did like a main series though.
Yes.
Sometime in the 2000s or something.
He did a series. I can't recall it now, but I know it's very well regarded among the fantasy sort of writing community. It's I can't think of what it's called for the life of me.
So, like, what do you know? So that being said, just maybe it's not a good sign that we don't know the name of his novel. But like, what do you know about him? Or
I just really know that he's a well-respected author, somebody that I haven't read yet.
But yeah, to go into that, like, it has a interesting. I know that he worked with an interesting magic system, and this was an interesting magic system too. But I think this is kind of more of a classic example of Ring fantasy. Actually, for this time around, I'm not quoting off of J.G. Huey for once.
Original ideas are happening.
Yeah, I do think that maybe he really rubbed off on me, but I think it doesn't take a genius like Huey to understand what's wrong with the series, even though I'm probably more sentimental towards it than he is, because I feel like he's picked it up one day and kind of blasted through it and tore it apart without, like, as someone who, like, has, hindsight and the thing being done for as long as it has been.
So what do you think is wrong with it? I mean, other than taking almost 30 years to complete.
Well, yeah, it's unnecessarily long because it's not just like something that took a long time, but it's relatively short, like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. People think it's a long novel. It really isn't. That took about 10 years, I think, to make.
That's a long writing for a novel.
Yeah, I know. It was only 800 pages compared to this, which is
in total, like the whole thing.
Yeah, in total, but
Yikes! That's 800 page books. That's 8 times the length, at least.
That's really what drew it to me, if you can believe it, because like on the shelves of the Feasterville library, actually, told you kind of where it's from. Like that, it literally dominated the shelf. It was like maybe two shelves, like a shelf and a half, and there's even a book zero. So technically, it's 14 novels.
Oof. Zero books. How can you have a book that's representative of nothing? Oh, the answer: have it be written by Anne Rice. Wait, what? That was a low blow. I'm sorry. I actually thought Interview with the Vampire.
Is she still right or what?
Oh yeah. I actually thought Interview with the Vampire was pretty. It wasn't bad. It was okay.
Twilight for the 70s.
Yes. No, I'm kidding. That was not meant to be an outright slam on Anne Rice. It came out harsher than it meant to be.
Tom Cruise was in the 90s movie.
Tom Cruise. Seriously, the dude looks the same. It's starting to creep me out.
Isn't he supposed to be immortal and all that? Or
I don't know. Is it? Wait.
I mean, not Tom Cruise, the vampire. Or are you talking about Tom
that's
Cruise?
True. I was talking about Tom Cruise, but you're right. The vampire is supposed to be immortal. So isn't Tom Cruise like an operating thetan, or is that not happening yet?
I don't know. I mean, if he was a Jehovah's Witness, he couldn't drink blood, but instead he's a Scientologist. So go figure.
Marvin Martian is a Scientologist. Yes, I'm here to tell you about Battlefield Earth.
John Travolta in like terrible late 90s makeup.
This conversation went so far off the rails.
I will say this real quick. I'm just glad that Battlefield Earth came out when it did, because like just a perfect blend of terrible CGI.
I have yet to see it. Have you seen it?
No, I really
Okay.
haven't. I like cold better than like bad. It's hard to explain.
It's like the difference between like watching a bad movie and watching a hokey movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you like this comparison. It's like a bad movie would be like The Room. A cult movie would be like Secret of Nim.
I was seeing that the other day because I just watched Clue the other day, and that's a cult movie, but it's not like,
yes, it is.
It's not like a bad movie versus like. Oh, there's a comedy that I watched that had Jeff Goldblum in it. It was like called Transylvania 69000 or something. That's a bad movie.
Was it like a futuristic B movie from like the 70s or something?
No, it was like Jeff Goldblum's like a reporter who gets stuck in Transylvania and is like fighting the forces of darkness.
Come out though?
What?
It's come out.
80s, I think. It came out in the 80s.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
It was so bad.
But yeah, like a cult movie would be like Secret of Nim, because it's like it's. For me, a cult movie is kind of like a film no one wanted, but it kind of like Princess Bride, believe it or not, was forever considered a cult movie.
Princess Bride, Balto 2.
I'm the only one who likes Balto.
I'm the only person who likes Balto 2. Cinderella 2, I think is better than the first one. Unpopular opinion. I think Cinderella 2 is better than the first one.
Well, okay, so anyway, yeah, how did this conversation start again?
I don't remember. Oh, also, the original Disney Robin Hood. That was a movie that nobody wanted. It was like a 2.5 hour children's fantasy movie with foxes. That's a good movie too. I haven't seen that in a while. Okay, I'm sorry, where were we? This movie started with you talking about the Wheel of Time's magic system.
I think it did, yeah. But I think what's kind of frustrating about its length is that like when it wasn't meandering into nothingness, it was actually being a ripoff of Lord of the Rings, and you could tell. And it wasn't like a very nice homage, like a deconstruction, but like a stretching out, and like you kind of saw it coming, and like you had to be very nice, air quotes, to the author to be like, yeah, sure, that works. That you ripping that off, like imagine Shannara only works.
It's worse than Shannara.
Like a summing up of the three books.
It's worse than Shannara. Oh, I can't believe.
It's worse than Shannara. It's I felt Shannara was dry. This was like had some potential.
Okay, so it's even worse because it had potential and squandered it, versus Shannara, which is just like. Wasn't the guy who wrote that like some sort of attorney? Wasn't it an attorney?
What?
The guy who wrote Shannara, I thought the guy who wrote was like an attorney or like a patent clerk or something.
I don't know. 1977 was a weird year. Star Wars came out, Silmarillion was published, Tolkien died, and AD&D came out with its first module.
Them were the days that we never experienced.
Yeah, we were totally, we fixed everything now.
We were not yet but a twinkle in our parents' eyes.
Actually, my dad skateboarded to see Star Wars at the Dollar Movie Theater, so...
Man. Olden times were weird. I never skateboarded anywhere. So, yeah, no, oh, that's... So there's 14 books, and they're all on the shelf in Feasterville.
Yeah, actually all of them, and some of them are repeats.
Was there that much of a demand for it in Feasterville, of all places?
Yes. There's a big section of Russian literature, too, which kind of surprised me.
See, that doesn't actually surprise me, though.
I didn't know it was a big Russian section.
It borders one?
Oh, okay.
So I'm thinking, like, North Philadelphia.
Well, yeah, like Bensalem, that kind of area, yeah. I can see that. I mean, I know which Calvary Chapel is, like, Russian Protestants and for the Russians, too. Interesting.
That's right, this is incredibly local Pennsylvania-isms. So, yeah.
But, yeah, to go back what you're saying, like, it did squander some stuff, like, I think the best word for it is it just threw away. It threw away promising cool ideas. Like, there's this idea of ages, which, is taken from the Tolkien concept, because just like in Tolkien, they're in the third age of the world, but it kind of means a different thing.
Yeah.
And to sum up, the first age is like our age, even though it's never explained, which, again, like, I feel like it could have really helped by saying it's in our world. Third age is kind of like a post-apocalyptic age, which ended in something called the Breaking of the World, which basically men and women could channel the power, which basically means just use magic. Mm-hmm. But then they drilled a hole where that universe's devil exists, and then the men went crazy, and then only women can use magic in the third age.
That's deeply inconvenient. That's interesting. I feel like that's an idea that we have moved away from in science fantasy fiction. Let's just call it speculative fiction. Yeah, I feel like that's an idea that we had a lot of in like the 70s and the 80s, was sort of like this height of society, collapse of society, rise again of society, using sort of
Which
that.
Which is also a thing that from Shannara too, if you remember, because they had like robots from stuff. Like attacking the main cast.
Original Final Fantasy. Dungeons and Dragons. They all had sort of that it's almost like the sort of like fall of the fall of the Roman Empire, rise of Western Europe.
It's supposed to be like a Cold War kind of thing. Like, actually, yeah, really, yeah, it's supposed to be Cold War, but also like mimicking, the rise of the real Middle Ages, actually.
Yeah, so like I like that idea. I actually use that idea sort of in the timeline of my fantasy world as sort of the...
Yeah, also weirdly considering the fact it doesn't really add up, because in real time they actually have gunpowder and women have the universal female suffrage, but they don't have like other stuff. And yet they still have like castles and stuff, which is why they actually stopped making castles, because gunpowder kind of ruined it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to me. Because like that's an idea I use, but I feel like we got away from that idea. But like I don't know, I want to bring that idea back, because I like that idea. The sort of high to low to rising. It keeps things interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, not to go off of a laundry list, but like of things that I think they screwed up. But one thing, just for coolness factors, is the second age is kind of this utopian Star Trek world that's kind of like. I think they implied that the use of magic kind of made peace across the world. Like, there's a big thing that's played around with but never explored, of this idea of peace and how to achieve it. And, the second age kind of achieved it. And they had all these cool Star Trek gadgets, which I really feel like would have made a cool sci-fi adventure of its own. Like, they would break down waste and pollution to something like your level. They had like the ability to use like a television screen at any wall you could project with like your mind. These things called
Dang.
boxes that could preserve things for like tens of thousands of years. And this is all just mentioned. Like it's not really explored. And like imagine talking about this and just leaving your audience never to explore.
It's like, here, I could have written this great science fiction novel. Here, enjoy some microwaved fantasy.
I think that Robert Jordan must have thought he was going to live forever because I think he was setting up everything for his own, everything to be said in that universe because like the Second Age is basically all the sci-fi things become possible, but also it's implied that dreams of that universe show us alternative realities, they're like actual different universes through the power of magic.
Interesting.
It's used for like one plot point in like the fourth book to train some Aes Sedai, which is essentially a witch in that universe, and then to test like her sanity or something. That's basically all it's used for.
That's such a cool idea.
I know, right? I thought. See, this is why I'm more sentimental about than Keeley because these are actually good ideas thrown away, though.
Yeah.
But what are you gonna say?
Oh no, I know. I was just saying that sounds like a really cool idea. Yeah. Dreams is an alternate dimension. I'm actually, because for graduate school, I had to draw up a whole new book idea, and part of my idea involved sort of the idea of that, like sort of like the mirror world. Like I'm thinking, like the game Darkseid. Like the old 90s adventure game. Like, I was thinking of dreams, like, in that sense. Could be a cool idea to play around with. But, like, this full, like, alternate dimension thing. Because I also just watched Into the Spider-Verse recently.
Okay.
So, like, I mean, you were talking about...
Did Gabrielle have you watch it, or...
No, I actually watched it with my mom.
Okay, yeah.
It was fun.
This is one of the women in your life.
Yes. It was fun.
Okay, yeah, I liked it, too.
I like it, too. But it has me thinking about that sort of alternate... Sort of the idea of alternate realities, which is interesting. I mean, I think that's ultimately an idea that kind of leads to a dead end if you play around with it too much. Because I mean, eventually you're going to receive. At least in the real world, you're going to resolve the point, which is, okay, so what if it's possible? It doesn't make any difference.
I know, unless you can actually have people come through there. But I'm not going to get into real science. Let's just say it's unverifiable or impossible, except for having a star's worth of energy, like a supernova.
Probably even more than that, because then they would even... Well, then, theoretically, what would stop it from being the universe you tap into? The star never exploded.
Yeah.
Or the star doesn't even exist.
Yeah, assuming it's even true. So.
Assuming it's true, which is a massive stretch.
Yeah. But
so,
this actually goes into... segues very nicely into the next concept that he threw out. So... yeah, so sometimes one time when that alternate universe, Dreams alternate universe was used, because I think it's just an interesting thing in general, just like of an interesting physics to explain the dreams and why they only happen to conscious beings. But this idea is that the reason why they're basically used, to test heroes. And the reason why they don't spiral out of control, there's two things in the world that regulate the world. And again, I don't think this was used very well. And one is the Wheel of Time, and it's kind of... The universe of the Wheel of Time is kind of deistic, but it has something... So basically, the god of that universe created something to regulate the universe instead. It's called the Wheel of Time. And, it's the concept of not only ages, but it's kind of like this thing that regulates things to make the best according to plan, according to that deity's will, essentially. And were you going to say something?
No, I'm trying. So it's kind of like Time's castle in Alice in Wonderland minus Time himself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay.
So, and this deistic deity who was never named, except I think he's called the Creator.
The deistic deity who was never named.
Yeah. That basically, if what could happen is he basically gives his creation universal free will for every place basically where the Wheel of Time doesn't intervene. So there's this thing called the Dark One, whose real name is Shaitan, with like the Islamic spelling actually, interestingly enough.
Okay.
So that basically tests his creation that every age he is able to be released into the world, and every time but every so often that the universe essentially resets itself every age. Only the real time determines for humanity and other species what that exactly looks like. But eventually, at the end of the sixth age, everything gets reset, and because reincarnation is a thing, you essentially get, to use a video game term, respawn. So it doesn't actually matter in the meantime anyway.
Mash B. Mash B input is happening.
So these characters, so there's certain characters who get respawned a lot, and they get, what they call in Hinduism good karma. So there's there's a chosen one character, as you can imagine.
Okay, so sort of like when you act in accordance with the Wheel of Time, you get sort of like, instead of like being like blessed, you get like auspices. Like it's like an auspicious start. Okay.
You get, to use a video game term, you get respawned with a higher class and a higher level. You get experience points.
Okay, I'm following.
So yeah, and essentially, there's these things, and if the Wheel of Time really favors you, you become something called a Tabaran.
I thought we said this wasn't going to be about Scientology. Okay,
Yeah, so
sorry, I keep talking over you. Keep going.
Oh, well, you're understanding, right?
Yes. So eventually, if you keep ascending up the skill tree of this world, you end up being a Tabaran.
Yeah, just think of it like tavern, but like Tabaran. You can say tavern too.
Tabaran.
Yeah, so it's someone. So like this is a very interesting concept. Like especially since like in the main character who's the chosen one, who basically is the one with the highest Tabaran points. I don't know. He was in the second age. Someone called Arthur Hawkling, who like united. He was basically like Alexander the Great for this fictional world, and he like basically I think created. I think he was Arthur Hawkling in the previous age, and he basically united the world, and he gave everyone a common language, so the writer could be lazy and just have everybody speak English.
I mean, yes and no. Might it be an out? Yes. Does it actually make sense? Kinda.
Yeah.
I mean it. I do remember. I think there was a book. I don't remember which one, but I remember there was one where they legitimately tried to be like, we're gonna do some in English and some in another language to mirror this, and it was like an unreadable mess. Like,
but yeah. Anyway, so like this person's fate, like I forget how exactly it worked, but I think I'm gonna screw this up, but like there's some guy called Louis Theron Kinslider, and as the name implies, he killed his family during the breaking when he went insane. So it's actually also Randolph Thor's previous life. He messed up the second age and brought on the third age, so he's back to fulfill his karma by sealing the Dark One, which is kind of the whole point of the story.
That's a lot going on to get to the central conflict.
And if you thought the Horcruxes were a hard sell, he also has to collect these plot coupons over the course of 14 books to seal the Dark One correctly, essentially.
Oh my word! So it's basically 14. It's 14 books of fetch quests.
Yeah, it really is.
No. All that set up for that.
Yeah, and I think what's worse about this is that like what the tavern does. Like you think that there's just going to be this interesting thing about fate and free will. But all really amounts to of this idea of Tabaran is that like stuff in the series like make characters pass through these small towns, and everyone either dies at once or everyone gets married out of like all the women in the town like want to marry the men, and then they get married, or it rains and it rains frogs, and it doesn't really make sense, but it's like just like go with it. And to quote TV tropes, I love this quote. The concept of Tabaran very nearly reached the point in the series where major characters can fulfill a half dozen ancient prophecies without even needing to, just by eating breakfast.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Perhaps we've overdone it with the prophecy. Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time. What some people think Daniel chapter 7 is. That was a Bible joke. I'm allowed to make those.
Eschatology, baby.
Eschatology, babe. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
If we ever get a merch store, Eschatology Baby is a t-shirt. No, okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of what the whole thing amounted to. Like the ideas are actually pretty good, but like the execution is like I don't even know what he was thinking.
And the interesting thing is it really does avoid being badly tropey up until it turns into a fetch quest. And it's not even really tropey; it's just bad.
Well, he actually wrote a lot of Conan books, actually, in the 1980s.
Really?
So he might have actually been writing... I know the first book took from 1984 to 1990, so he might actually been writing Conan in between. Of course, he a lot of times he autofilled with Lord of the Rings, or what he thinks of human nature is, without, actually writing good stuff.
Do you know how well his Conan books were received?
I think they're pretty forgettable. I've never heard anyone, like, say anything good about it or anything necessarily bad. I mean, I think he was under much heavier editing, so I don't even know how much. I mean, it might have been even like serialized stuff, like what Howard actually did, but I don't really know.
So like just keep it going.
What do you mean?
Like just sort of like keep the franchise alive for a little bit.
I guess. I mean, this was like you probably know more about 80s fantasy than I do, but I know he was like.
I know, but
I'm saying it's how he was trained, and I think kind of
Howard had been. Don't get me wrong, but Howard must have been dead for a while in the 80s.
Oh yeah, he died in the 30s. I think he actually died in suicide. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I remember. I think he died pretty young.
I think he actually died like within like months or something crazy of Lovecraft or something.
They were good friends.
Oh yeah, that's weird. Like you actually see homages. Actually, to each other, he actually has like Eldritch Abominations Howard in his He actually has him like I think there might have actually been a word for word reference to the Necronomicon in one of the Conan stories actually.
Yeah, no, and in the modern Call of Cthulhu game, they have a module about Robert. They have a module about Robert Howard. It's not supposed to be a very good one. It's not really a very well liked one, but there is one.
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of funny because I think what he went off of that like Lovecraft mentioned something called the Hyborian Age, which is kind of like more when the time of the Great Old Ones and like humans were sort of a thing, but not like because you kind of hear about like Mesopotamia and like ancient Europe, which is kind of funny because that's kind of how it was, at least how we understood it more in the 1930s, which is. Makes Conan a very interesting time capsule for good and bad reasons, I should say. But yeah, that's another thing that how your information gets shared between like what you did, and as you do know that I am one of the characters that have been inspired by your work too, even though they're not set necessarily in the same series. Yeah,
no, there are definitely some. Definitely some interesting. I do want to delve into more of the classic fantasy, like the classic fantasy for this graduate school project that's coming up. Because this is going to be the big one. This is going to be, and I am worried about doing the same thing as Robert Jordan's thing. Is like he tried to invest too much in the universe without giving it a great story. And because I'm thinking like I don't want to abandon my universe, but this has to be a different story. So it's.
Yeah, you're doing better than what I do. I'm just not writing.
No, I hear you. Actually, based on I think the question you wanted to ask me, we'll get back to that at the end.
Yeah, and but another thing, I swear this is the last big thing I go into, but there's this kind of idea of that like that the reason why society is the way it is and human nature is because men and women have sort of literally like in magic. That, of course, certain people can go through better, but like in Third Age, men lose it because of the breaking of the world. And then women gain all this power in like kind of a matriarchy, and I think it was kind of what Jordan was, I think he was doing, and this kind of made him kind of an early postmodernism, that he was deconstructing general culture to show how men had too much power, but really if you read his women characters, it sounds like he never talked with a woman other than his wife, really. And they kind of make them very, like, whiny and not nice. And I don't know, maybe it's something more like you have to read to understand, but, like, Do you think there's any? I guess one thing. Do you think there's any like something interesting in there to talk about, or what?
Well, coming from somebody who hasn't read the series, I can only give you so much. I will say that really up until maybe the 90s, I mean, sort of like up until pretty recently, and even still, I think the stereotype remains, I think, much more than it deserves to, that fantasy has kind of become the bastion of the who are those guys, the guys who never have incel. That's what I'm thinking of.
Oh, yeah.
Like sort of like the virginal underground living
Oh.
white male.
Yeah, I think the fact that like George R. R. Martin as well as Joe Abercrombie like gone so far and how they have been like, I don't know why they think that's deep. I think the idea is like with that kind of a different thing, but like, oh, that's realistic. That's how it really went down.
Right, and I think that that stereotype is stuck around with fantasy. I think probably more than it deserves, especially in the modern age. I think we've seen an influx of more diversity lately, and I think that's for the positive. I think it's definitely a positive to get more voices out there.
Well, we've only been literate for so long.
Right. We have. I mean, though and even if you go way back to the bardic phase, with the exception of maybe in Celtic folklore, the role of the bard has always been male. The role of the myth teller has always been, not always, but more traditionally, I think, with very obvious exceptions. I think in the obviously Celtic tradition, they had a very different approach to how they treated women. A very fascinating, a much healthier approach to how they dealt with women in leadership positions in an ancient society. Where was I going with this? Where am I going with this? Oh,
well,
right.
Like how Jordan showed like a deconstruction to teach us a lesson, because
Okay.
magic has given women being the sole possessor of magic has given them like, there are queens in the Third Age and never kings and stuff like that.
I mean, I would have to, I'd have to read it to guess at what the author's talking about. I'd say based on the era, I doubt it's any kind of like pro-feminist thing, but who knows? I would have no way of knowing.
I mean, if you don't know what to say, you don't know what to say.
I don't know what to say. I will just say that I think that stereotype kind of got a start in the 80s. Was kind of you know what I was talking about, you know, the chubby, being the bastion of chubby single white men, and I think it's worked very hard, fantasy that is, to drop that I guess you could call it a stigma nowadays. It was even a stigma back then, I think. I think it's worked hard to drop it, but for how is sort of the dominance of that culture at that time, which I think is much rarer. I've never encountered it heads on, at least in my journeys through fantasy.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm sure people have. I think actually Dungeons and Dragons, and especially how I think the role playing community has been very, very, very progressive. As of late, I think that has definitely broken that mold, at least in that community. As for the literature, it's hard to tell. Based on bookstore shelves, it seems to be stepped away from a lot. Based on sales and popularity of stuff like the Hunger Thrones, Game of Thrones. That's it. That one.
Yeah, Game of Thrones.
I think it's still there. I don't know if you're ever going to be able to get rid of that in all subsets, because I think that might just be an ultimately inherent thing in people who are isolated and don't want to listen to other people's ideas.
Well, it's called a fantasy for a reason. It's like, it's not every. I know you treat escapism well, but
not everybody does. No, I think for a lot of people it is their power trip fantasy, and being Conan for a lot of people who would be in that single white male basement dwelling. Being Conan is sort of like, Conan is their idealized self, and their pinnacle woman is the pinup princess in the tower.
You know, sometimes I like to say that the art's better than the book, but it's not always true.
No, not really.
But to kind of segue to what I was going to say was, it's the way I'm describing it is kind of confusing you, and I think I know why, because
Okay.
It's kind of hard to tell what he was doing with certain things. Apparently, the author, lived and maybe grew up in North Carolina, like Eastern North Carolina, so probably was surrounded with some kind of conservative, right-wing living. I mean, he's a baby boomer too, so he grew up in Jim Crow.
Like Piedmont, North Carolina area.
I forget. I almost would say Raleigh. He grew up in.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I think maybe it's possible he was on the left, but like he's done. But I think the stupid people are, and I don't think he was a very smart. I mean,
Wow.
Like 12 years, so.
Yikes.
That like the less smart you are, like the less your political compass will make sense when you map it all out. Like I said, you kind of wonder why he was writing about certain things. Like, yeah, he writes about women in charge, but like it's kind of a deconstructionist, almost contrarian portrayal, and also like he also has like, let's just say like this sexual fetish thing with women together, but you wonder like, is he like trying to portray minorities or like and different attitudes, or is he being exploited? And like, the kind of way he described it and kind of shoehorned it kind of felt more exploitive in a way.
So what you're saying is he had ideas there that would be fairly radical for the age and genre in which they were occurring.
In the early 90s, I guess so, but like he did.
I mean,
yeah. It's almost like if George R. R. Martin was an SJW, but was like never read a book on feminism of any type. And
are we sure that isn't the case?
I'm trying not to go into detail right now of what specific examples that I could use.
It's
just say it's a lot of women with women. Okay.
So to sum this up, you're saying that there is that he addresses social issues and minorities and women in a in a way that makes it unclear why he addresses them and the way he addresses them, or why and how.
Why he's including it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if his intentions are pure, like if they're really for like if they're like he's sexual reasons or like progressive reasons. And it's not a thin line if you read certain.
That's one thing that I feel like comes up a lot, especially in books from that age. So the idea of like matriarchy kind of comes up, yeah. But I don't know. I haven't seen like anything that's done it like exceptionally well or even like respectfully. Like you know what I mean? I mean like Dungeons and Dragons had the idea of matriarchy in several of their species, yeah. But it's like, and I say species because not humans. It doesn't happen among humans. But it happens among, like, what we would see and what the characters in that world would see as savages. And I find that interestingly telling.
Yeah, well, here's a good example. Like, as the series progressed, like, certain characters became, for lack of a better word, sexual minorities, like, randomly in the series, with a lot of times no hint, number one, beforehand for books on end. Especially with certain situations, I think they would reveal that stuff. And almost no effect or consequence, you could say.
Was it normative in was it normal in their culture?
Well, I don't think. And then that's the thing. It's not even shown like what people think about certain things like homosexuality. It's like, yeah, this character was bisexual, but what does it say about them? Or it's saying that they have low self-control. Are they like questioning their sexuality?
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, but it's never done. It's never played with. It's just saying like, oh yeah, I was in this all-female magic school, and then I kind of got weird with my roommate. But why did you, and what happened with that? And you're just writing this because you think it's
Because there's an interesting idea there.
This is just a man, like a lonely man pretending to be an SJW so it can be a George R. R. Martin. That's what I'm saying.
It's sort of like there's an interesting. I forget who proposed this thought experiment. It was in a textbook I think I had for college. It was saying that like sort of like in if you compare like Viking culture to modern culture, there's sort of like there. Say you have two men, one in Viking culture, one in modern culture, and one is sort of like one is questioning like their ambition, like the violence of their ambition. Yeah, the violence of their ambition, and the fact that they have mixed sexual urges between the genders. And where somebody in modern Brooklyn is going to be more encouraged to explore the gender and step away from the the violent ambition, whereas somebody in like Viking culture would be more encouraged to follow their violent ambition, step away from mixed sexual urges. And I think that's actually a really interesting idea, as you could have in a sort of a culture similar to that in a fantasy novel. Have a heroic male character sort of questioning himself in that way. That's a very, like, I'm not usually a big subversion person. That's a fascinating subversion to a classic.
Some people use that to like kind of quote unquote prove relativism, but to me it's kind of more an interesting. I've been telling you about a character who questions her sexuality because she questions her religion. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why she has non-human biology, and it's one of those her old species biology that she's an uplifted animal. A lot of that baggage comes from her old biology. I'm keeping her opinion in her mouth, so to speak.
Right, because it matters what she feels and it matters what she thinks, because it's about her.
But it's meta-modernist. It's not just about her relative perspective. It's it's balance between her relative perspective plus the objective truth and what she does with it.
Right. Okay, because she is a creature ultimately of her body and how she came in. At least if I understand what we've been talking about, sorry to clarify for people.
In my universe, it's called a neko.
Yeah.
So,
blah.
Your face.
Well, boo. No,
Judge away, Mr. Furry.
But no, so we were talking about the idea. We were probably about 2 weeks ago. We were kind of having an actual in-depth discussion about the idea of how far can you go with anthropomorphizing animals before you have to start answering some big existential questions. Yeah. And I think this is actually an interesting proving ground. I'll keep it short because I very rarely have novels that I hate. I have novels that I don't. I know how. I think everybody knows.
Like the least, and you think we'll have the most interesting conversation.
I'm trying to think of things you've read. I know it's not really a novel, but I really don't.
You never read The Wheel of Time, so it's okay.
True. A book that I really don't like is Farewell to Manzanar. It's a novel / memoir about the Japanese internment camps during World War II. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing to talk about. It's something that we often don't talk about in America, and it's something that we should talk about in America. I don't know, but it's just the narrator and the author, because the narrator and the author are really the same person. Her view of things, it never feels quite right. Like I know it sounds weird, but it's a little bit all over the place. She definitely lionizes her father, like to a incredible extent, when it's kind of obvious that he was actually a very abusive person.
That's kind of weird.
And it made me uncomfortable when I was 12. It made me uncomfortable when I looked at it again, and it still just makes me really uncomfortable. There's something just like, I mean, because we should talk about the Japanese internment camps, and there's something just so off about that narrative, and like not just because like, oh, we're gonna round up Japanese people and put them in camps. I mean, that's very off, but like,
yeah, of course, yeah.
But like, there's just something about just her narrative and the perspective of childhood that is so, I don't know, there's something just wrong about, like, and it's not just, like, the sense of, like, wow, these people were wronged, which is true, and you'd have either way. It's sort of like this, there's something wrong about this kid. There's something wrong about this story, and it's just, I don't know what it was. I've never been able to shake it.
Well, have you ever seen therapy art from people with PTSD?
Yes.
Like it's kind of looks off, uncomfortable. Like of course it's like most of the time it's like on training, right?
It could very well be. I mean, but she's not trained. If I remember correctly, I think she's a professional columnist for a major newspaper. If I remember right.
I don't know. I meant like people deal with trauma differently. It just could have colored her experience to the point that like it's really hard for her to be objective.
That's true. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Another way is that she sees herself maybe as a victim, so much as a victim that maybe, even if subconsciously, and this isn't an accusation, this is just an idea, that maybe she doesn't, she just maybe like the Americans in her life at the time kind of treat her so bad that anyone, including her father, seemed better just because they were related in the same race.
That's actually an interesting idea. That, I don't know, that could have something to do with other books I didn't like. I have a hard time getting through anything written by G.A. Henty. I know that's kind of like the homeschool touchstone author G.A. Henty and all those historical novels.
Well, it definitely rings a bell, but that's all I can say about that.
I remember reading the Hittite one, I remember reading the Hittite Warrior, and that was okay. Beric the Briton was the most interesting one, but that one I stopped because I was definitely too young to be reading that when I read it. Because, like, it deals with, like, Boadicea and, like, some pretty intense Celtic paganness. And the other ones I could never get through.
I think I might have had, I read a Greek version, like something, Sporodius in his town or something.
I don't know. So, Farewell to Manzanar, I don't know. I don't know if that was just because I read it at a bad time. That book, there's something just so off about it. I don't know what. I just don't know what it is, and it drives me crazy. Another book I really don't like. I already talked about this. Two of Michael Crichton's books. Because it's funny, because I love Jurassic Park. I like Sphere a lot. I think they're both really good books. I actually also, I enjoy a couple of his other, but like Next, I told you guys about that last episode.
Yeah,
but like,
that was weird. That sounds like a fanfic.
Right, the guy who should be the good guy but is played as the antagonist gets shot to death by a pedophile at a Six Flags. And there's a talking ape. Congo's a good book. But also another book that he wrote that's pretty bad is the pirate one. I can't remember what it's called. It's like Pirate Winds or Trade Sales or Sail Winds or something. Here's the thing. It was found and edited after he died. And
out of like posthumous notes.
Yeah, that book should not have been published. It was a bad novel. It was both too long and too short simultaneously, and I couldn't tell you who the main character was. After 350 pages, I could not tell you who the main character was. I don't know, it was crazy. There's some rich girl who like sells her soul to the devil to stop a hurricane, and there's like this lecherous old judge and some naked woman and a pirate captain and like the classic cabin boy who becomes a hero thing.
Oh.
It's so weird. It doesn't work. Nothing about it works.
There's a timeline you didn't work in.
Oh, I hate a timeline too. It's funny. I dislike all three of those pretty violently. Is there anybody?
Crane didn't have a big camera, did you?
Was it?
Crane didn't have a big timeline.
No, he really didn't. He didn't write that many books. Is there anything else? I don't know. I know this is way off topic, but I really think the Iliad is kind of overrated.
Oh.
Don't
hard to follow, honestly.
It's like listen to somebody sum up the Iliad. Read. You can read the Odyssey. The Odyssey is shorter and it's a lot more interesting. And also the Aeneid is just more interesting in general. It's a better story. because it follows one guy having a lot of crazy adventures with a lot of like beautiful prose and stuff, whereas the Iliad just like a lot of people doing a lot of nasty things. There's a lot of phrases that involve piercing somebody through their buttock with swords, and it's, I don't know. So that's kind of my. Is there any other books I really hate? I didn't like Shannara. You know that.
Yeah.
I don't want to slam Chuck Black's one book because I know, and probably nobody has any idea who Chuck Black
Was he the guy who went to Harvey Cedars at one time?
Yeah, but see, because I actually heard that his other books are better, and like especially because what his books were able to accomplish, I think deserves more credit than like what they actually are literarily. Because he never said he wanted to be a writer or a professional writer. That's not even what he is first and foremost. So I actually really give him credit for putting himself out there with that. And I have heard that his other books, the ones that aren't in that one main series, are actually pretty good. All right, do you want to move on to questions?
Yeah.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. So, how do you get in the zone for writing so that starting to write overcome distractions, etc.? Would you recommend your methods to others?
Oh, I would not recommend my methods to anybody. Okay, getting in the zone to write for me is really hard. I really struggle to do so. Usually what I do to get in the zone to write is I turn on music that I've listened to at least twice. Songs that I've listened to at least twice, and that aren't poignant. Those are the two things. Songs I like that I've listened to twice that aren't poignant enough to steal my attention away. Like, or at least are fast enough that it would, like, who was it? I was trying to write and listen to Stan Rogers folk music the other day. That didn't work. So usually what I do, I can write with music with lyrics in the background, or with, like, I can listen to music with lyrics while I write. A lot of people can't do that. So that's a personal thing. So my advice is do it every day. It's a marathon, not a race. You need to do writing exercises. Do listen to music.
I don't know about me, but if it makes you work, that's the formula.
Try to stay away from screens if you can. When practice,
other than the screen that I have to write on.
Yeah, and some days you're gonna force it, and I know this is some people will be not happy about this. Forcing it and fixing it later is better than not doing it. So
that's really good advice.
For my first question, I'm actually going to flip it. This isn't the one I was going to ask, but I'm actually going to flip it around on you.
Yeah,
what is your writing method? What's the Matt method?
To me, it's kind of like semi-isolation. So, weirdly enough, I've noticed with my schoolwork that when I'm in a public area, like my school library, it kind of gives you time without needing to look at a clock, because a lot of times I'm not the only one doing work. So it's like, I look at other people, or eventually look at other people, don't stare at strangers, but like, it's like, man, they did way more than me in more time, like, I better get on this, and that actually forces me to work harder.
That's not bad advice.
Yeah, and I do mono screen, then I shut off my phone, I'll like literally like turn it off and pretend it doesn't work, because I can't go on it, and I limit myself to one tab, because if I have a blank tab open, which I try to do when I go for extra research for another thing, it doesn't work, because I usually use it for nonsense. Semi-constructed nonsense, but nonsense mostly.
It turns into YouTube, doesn't it?
It does. For me, it does.
Me too.
And I don't listen to music, so instead I listen to the music of the environment, people talking and going around conversations, not just so I can get that Shinkaroof ultra-realistic dialogue style, but because, again, it gives me a passage of time and know how much time I'm wasting, how much time I'm using. So just earplugs where I just can't, I'm anti-room, so to speak. And another thing is, since I'm a screenwriter, I have my tab up, which has Write a Duet, so it's always hovering there, reminding me you better do this, these type of stupid sense, and even if it's complete nonsense, just to say, hey, you got one sentence done today, you did something.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice too there, definitely. So, what's your second question for me, boss?
So, what are some recurring themes, archetypes, and situations that you can see yourself dealing with in the future with your fiction? So, to avoid using your last name, Andrewsian kind of fiction. So, there are things like the search for home, metamodernism, anthropomorphic animals, etc.
Okay. So you've hit on some of my favorites. What are some themes that one theme that I'd like to work on right now, I don't know how it is going to come up, is going to be reimagining the classic hero's journey.
Okay.
That's one that I'd like to deal with, but I do think you've hit on some of the themes. I very much like the search for home as an idea. It's a very interesting idea to play around with.
So it's worth another exploration of some type in another novel.
Worth a better exploration. Oh, so many ideas. So many ideas. Right now I couldn't tell you off the top of the head, but I think themes will start to appear.
You say that because you notice things that only you write, and sometimes you can become self-aware and try to write it, really.
Mm-hmm. So, my question for you is a technical one. My second one for you. When you were attempting to construct dialogue, I know you enjoy to go for hyper-realism. What is the hardest part and what is the easiest part of going with that style?
I think the easiest part is just knowing what you actually want to write, the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest part is it sounds stupid, but when to put in verbal filters, and I think I've got it in the sense of you gotta go through a two-step process. Is that you write the actual thing, and then you read it out loud, and then you think, okay, how would someone actually say this? You actually do impromptu table reading. You're okay, and then you put little accent in it, because two of my characters have an accent. Well, really, maybe three of them. So all of the characters have some sort of accent, and that really puts them into a spin of there's a little bit of acting, so to speak. So
interesting. Okay, that makes sense. So by verbal filters, you mean accents, stumbles, qualifying statements that we make in language, so and wait, but.
But yeah, I think maybe the hardest thing is the differentiation, because that happens holistically. The only thing I made John Long, for example, less of a jovial, levitatious character, more of a serious, stoic one. I mean, Ron more of a pseudo-intellectual, and Robbie is this ex-anonymous, meme-quoting 4chan user.
I see. He's funny. Ron's ironic, and John is straight, and he's the straight man. I mean, essentially.
Yeah, Ron is actually pretty smart because he sees contradictions in things in capitalism and power hierarchies, things like that. And, he's charismatic, has to be a great speaker, and he needs to know the emotional punch of things, whether it's this minority group and he's actually kind of right, but I think his methods are wrong. That's another interesting thing.
Yeah.
That's really charismatic.
All right, so thank you for letting us vent our spleen, and who knows? Maybe we will revisit this. Maybe we'll talk about the other book that Matthew wanted to talk about. Maybe someday I'll figure out why I don't like Farewell to Manzanar. Maybe just because it took me 3 days to figure out how to pronounce Manzanar and stop calling it marzipan. Seriously though, I did once call it marzipan in class. Oh, because I've been watching one of those cooking, Food Network cooking challenges with cakes and stuff. Talk about marzipan all the night before, and I slept ran to class. Farewell to marzipan. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, have a good night, folks.